meeting. First of all, we will start with a welcome address by Mr. Giovanni Tattaglia Polcini, who is the chairman of the Sports Integrity Global Alliance, SIGA. Mr. Polcini, the floor is yours.
Thank you for this possibility to share some discussion, observation, and commentary on the threat that corruption poses to the sports sector. And as you perfectly know, I'm the chair of the Sport Integrity Global Alliance. In this independent charge, the most important multi-shareholder subject involved in this kind of activities all around the world. To prevent and fight corruption is a call of duty, in particular in the world of sport. And from my side, as a first message I want to share with all of you, we have to create a basis to go ahead and to move from the call to action to concrete steps for the near future. We are here representing experience. I see on the screen also Mr. Drago Kos, the former chair of the working group on bribery of the OECD, one of the most important distinguished working group in the fight against corruption. And so for the representative of other institutions involved in. I truly hope that we can contribute with this particular session to the success of the Sport Integrity Week this year. And for now, I stop here and I come back to you, thanking the organization also for the technical level of the webinar. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Mr. Polcini. Now we will hear from the Head of Strategic Partnerships at the International Anti-Corruption Academy, IACA, Mr. Jaroslaw Petrosiewicz.
Yes, thank you very much, James. Dear colleagues, on behalf of the International Anti-Corruption Academy, I'm glad to welcome all the participants of the Integrity and Anti-Corruption in Sport Forum. Let me start by stating that IACA is an international organization and at the same time a post-secondary educational institution. Established as an organization on 8 March 2011, IACA has currently 80 parties, including 76 and 4 international organizations. The Academy delivers anti-corruption education and training to public and private sector professionals and practitioners, as well as academics, media professionals, and civil society organizations. The Academy currently offers 4 master's programs, as well as various standardized and tailor-made capacity building trainings. The problem of anti-corruption and compliance in sport has become one of the major problems in the international anti-corruption agenda. To illustrate this, let me refer to the political declaration of the 2021 special session of the United Nations General Assembly against Corruption. In this document titled Our Common Commitment to Effectively Addressing Challenges and Implementing Measures to Prevent and Combat Corruption and Strengthen International Cooperation, the UN member states declared safeguarding sport from corruption as one of their goals. Moreover, in 2020, the G20 Corruption Working Group put this on the agenda, and in 2021 adopted the high-level principles on tackling corruption in sport. IACA is willing to join forces with the international sport community and share its knowledge and expertise in anti-corruption and compliance to enhance the effectiveness and efficiency of integrity and compliance program in sports organizations. It is with this in mind that on 19 June this year, IACA signed a memorandum of understanding and established a partnership with Sport Integrity Global Alliance. We hope that IACA's partnership with SIGA will advance the global fight against corruption and promote good governance and safeguard the values of fairness and transparency in sports. The Anti-Corruption and Compliance Sport Forum is an integral part of the SIGA Integrity Week 2023 and one of the first steps on the path of cooperation between our two institutions. Utilizing our global expertise in anti-corruption education and capacity building, IACA offers tailor-made trainings on anti-corruption and compliance in sports for various stakeholders. In 2023, IACA also started a new research project in sport. The aims of this project are twofold. First, we want to identify main corruption risks and typologies of corrupt misconduct in various sports. Secondly, we plan to develop an overview of best practices in promoting integrity, implementing anti-corruption compliance management systems, and whistleblower hotlines in international and national sports organizations, professional leagues, and clubs. Dear colleagues, I wish you all very interesting and productive discussions and look forward to cooperating with all of you in the future. IACA is ready to join forces with sports organizations and all other relevant stakeholders to safeguard sport from corruption and related types of misconduct. Thank you very much and have a very fruitful debate.
Thank you very much, Mr. Jaroslaw Petrosiewicz. As Mr. Emmanuel Macedo de Medeiros, the global CEO of SIGA, cannot be present with us here today, he has sent us a short video message, and I'm going to leave the floor for the video message to be played.
Ladies and gentlemen, dear friends in sport integrity, happy Sport Integrity Week. What an honor it is for me to join you in this momentous occasion, in this auspicious thought leadership event. I cannot express how deeply honored I am of being here with you today. It was precisely in this very same city, early this year, on the 19th of June, that the International Anti-Corruption Academy and the Sport Integrity Global Alliance signed an historic partnership. A partnership, you will recall, that embodies our unwavering commitment to upholding integrity, promoting good governance, and safeguarding the values of legality, transparency, and accountability in the sporting industry. I stated then, and I reaffirm now, judges not for our intentions, but for our actions and the results that will come with it. And here we are, ladies and gentlemen, less than 3 months after we have put ink on paper, mobilizing the entire sporting industry, pressing for sport integrity all over the world, backed by over 80 hosting partners and hundreds of organizations more that are taking part in this Sport Integrity Week edition 2023, delivering exactly what we promised. I stated then, and I reaffirm now, in the most unequivocal terms, we will not spare any effort to eradicate corruption from the face of sport. And this is exactly what we are doing. And we are doing it by implementing our universal standards on sport integrity, the most advanced, the most robust set of universally recognized standards on good governance in sport, financial integrity in sport, sports betting integrity, and youth development and protection in sport. We are doing it by convincing more and more sports organizations all over the world to embrace the independent scrutiny and go through the SIGA independent rating and verification system. We are doing it by setting up, as part of our organic structure, a permanent committee on anti-corruption in sport, led precisely by our independent chair, Dr. Giovanni Tartaglia Polcini, who, amongst many other high-level responsibilities, also leads the G20 Anti-Corruption Working Group. And we are doing, ladies and gentlemen, this and much more. Quite significant, we are also delivering training, education, and capacity building to sports organizations, governments, international institutions, law enforcement, via our new delivery arm, SIGA Solutions, or if you wish, Global sports solutions for global problems. And this is exactly what we, SIGA and IACA, will do later this year in December when the Conference of the States Parties to the United Nations Convention Against Corruption takes place in Atlanta in the United States. But ladies and gentlemen, let's face it, there is no doubt that sport is a powerful force for social change, uniting people across cultures, countries, and generations. Sport indeed has the power to inspire us, to challenge us, and teach us valuable lessons about teamwork, respect, and resilience. Sport also contributes to the economic development, health promotion, and peace building. However, and this has to be said, sport is more vulnerable than ever. Vulnerable to corruption, vulnerable to money laundering, vulnerable to tax evasion, vulnerable to transnational organized crime, and many other threats that undermine its positive impact and threaten its credibility and legitimacy. These crimes not only harm the integrity of sporting competitions and the welfare of their participants, these crimes also erode public trust and confidence in sports organizations and institutions. And that's precisely why we need to act together. That's precisely why we need to do more. We need to do more. We need to go beyond signing conventions and producing laws. We need to do more than grandiloquent proclamations. We need to implement conventions and laws effectively without further delay. But more than that, we need to enforce them rigorously. We need to monitor them closely. We need to hold ourselves and others accountable. We need to reward best practices and punish bad ones. We need to promote transparency and integrity, both in public and private sectors, as they are interlinked. We need to empower citizens. We need to empower civil society to participate and oversee. We need to educate and raise awareness among all stakeholders and, of course, the fans. And governments, ladies and gentlemen, governments and sports governing bodies need to stop navel gazing, need to stop turning a blind eye to offshores and tax havens, most of which operate, as we know, in total opacity, in the dark, in the shadows, free from oversight, free from scrutiny. We need to foster a real culture change in the sporting sector and ensure that all stakeholders adhere to the highest integrity standards, which means adhere to the SIGA universal standards on sport integrity. We need to strengthen legal frameworks and enforcement mechanisms that protect sport from corruption and other types of crimes and enhance cooperation at national, region, and international level. We need to raise awareness. We need to continue to educate all those involved in sport about the risks and consequences of corruption and empower them to report and resist any wrongdoing. This is the vision, ladies and gentlemen, that SIGA and IACA share. And this is the mission that we have embarked on with our partnership. By joining forces 3 months ago, we knew that we were able to strengthen our collaboration with other international organizations and mechanisms. That is what we are doing. That's what we are doing to like-minded organizations that advocate for sport integrity and fight against corruption, such as the United Nations Convention Against Corruption, UNCAC, and the OECD Convention on Combating Bribery on Foreign Public Officials in International Business Transactions, or between Europe and Latin America with El Pacto, just to name a few. But by coming together, we, SIGA and IACA, leverage our respective expertise, experience, and networks to deliver joint projects, enhance information sharing, provide capacity building initiatives, and promote best practice on anti-corruption. By joining us at the forefront of this fight, by taking an active stance in this Sport Integrity Week, you and everyone who's out there wearing the Sport Integrity badge from New York to New Delhi, or from Gothenburg in Scandinavia to Avellaneda in south of Argentina, or Kuala Lumpur, or wherever you are, if you give a step forward, if you join us, if you listen to the voice inside you, the champion that lives inside you, you will add tremendous strength and power to our cause. Of this, I am absolutely certain. And what a sight it is, dear friends, to watch this partnership grow and expand in numbers, representativeness, and legitimacy. This partnership of ours, this fantastic global movement that we are all part of, is not just a milestone in the global effort to strengthen prevention and eradicate corruption in sport. It is a true testament to the strong commitment and leadership of both IACA and SIGA, and all of us in this field. It is also, let's not forget it, a powerful call for action for all of us, for all those who care about sport and its role in today's troubled world. What a moment we have ahead of us. A moment where we must undertake our responsibility to safeguard the sport we love and the industry that we are part of, to ensure that sport remains a source of inspiration, a source of joy, a source of hope of a better world for generations to come, to ensure that sport plays its role to the fullest in today's troubled society and global economy. We have indeed such responsibility, but more than that, we have the opportunity to make a difference. We have the tools and the mechanisms to do so, and we have the will and the commitment to do so. So what are we waiting for? What are we waiting for? Let us make of this Sport Integrity Week a true catalyst for action. Let us make of this fantastic gathering not just a collective declaration of intent, but a roadmap for real, meaningful, effective, long-lasting change. For that, for what you have done, for the strength, the incentive, the support that you will do for your participation in the Sport Integrity Week, we thank you. We thank you for your attention, and we wish you a great Sport Integrity Week.
Oh, what a moment. What a time to be alive. Powerful message from Mr. Medeiros. So some of the take homes are that we need to implement conventions and laws and monitor them effectively. We need to promote best practices and punish the bad ones. What a wonderful message from there. Thank you all for the warm welcome. We'll go on with our first panel talking about the modern challenges and trends in corruption in sports. The panel will be moderated by Mr. Drago Kos, who is currently the chair of the OECD Istanbul Anti-Corruption Action Plan. Between 2014 and 2022, he was the chair of the OECD Working Group on Bribery in International Business Transactions. Between 2003 and 2011, he was the chairman of the Council of Europe's Group of State Action Against Corruption, GRECO. In his country, Slovenia, he was the first chair of the Commission for the Prevention of Corruption and leader of a working group which produced the Slovenian Corporate Integrity Guidelines. Mr. Kos, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, James. I have to say it's an honor for me to appear in this event today. I would like to thank the organizer for inviting me, but I guess they knew it already because when we speak about corruption and sport, I'm always for it. First of all, because I was fighting corruption for the last 40 years, and because I'm still actively engaged in sport. So we will do it in the following way. We have three very distinguished speakers. I will first represent all three of them, and then I will ask them three questions to which they will try to respond. Of course, I will just read the questions once. I will not repeat them three times. Of course, if the speakers want, they can go even wider than these questions or answers themselves, because I'm sure, knowing at least one of them, and I know that there's a vast experience which they can share with us. So the speakers today are, we heard already, Mr. Giovanni Tartaglia Pulcini. He is the chairman of SIGA now. He has been public prosecutor in Italy for almost 20 years. And then he became the legal advisor to the Minister of Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation in Italy. He chaired the G20 Anti-Corruption Working Group, and he has been one of the most active members of the OECD Working Group on Bribery when I had the pleasure to chair it. He held many other important positions, but for the sake of time, Joanna, I hope you don't mind if I just go to the next speaker, which is Mr. Dieter Brackeveld, who is the Integrity and Sports Training Officer at Interpol. Before that, he was an advisor in international sports policy within the Belgian government administration. And before that, he worked for a number of years at the Belgian embassy in Beijing in China. The third one, Dr. Adam Masters, he's the senior lecturer in criminology at the Australian National University and the executive director at the Transnational Research Institute on Corruption. He came to the Australian National University 24 years ago. No, before that, he had 24 years career with the Australian government, working in the Department of Defense, the tax office, and the 18 years with the Australian Federal Police. So we really have experienced speakers today which have seen and tested almost everything what it could be tested in the area of corruption, but also in the area of sport. So the three questions which should serve as, let's say, the basic guide for the speakers when giving their presentations are the following ones. First of all, which relations are more vulnerable for corruption and other malpractices in sport? Second, what are the modern trends of crime of corruption in sport? And do our speakers see any new risks of misconduct arising from the use of new technologies in sport? And last but not least, what are the key motivational factors for athletes, managers, referees to engage in misconduct in sport? As you see, with all these three questions, we have tried to encompass all possible aspects of the feature we are discussing today, which is corruption in sport. And I'm absolutely sure that our speakers will give us an interesting description of what is going on, hopefully also the ideas what to do in the future, and some guidance how to get where we want to go, which is, I will not say corrupt-free, but sport with as less corruption as possible and with as highest integrity as possible. So Giovanni, I have a particular pleasure that I can start with you. The floor is yours.
Thank you, dear Drago. Thank you all. And I can begin referring to the vulnerability of sport in general, because I think that it's time to use not diplomatic channel in representing reality and saying and threatened by corruption and organized crime. First, sport is autonomous and independent in itself. We all know that the Olympic spirit as a call of duty imposes that the ruling of activities in the sports sector and professional and amatorial level could be open to the autonomy and the independence. And this is a matter of fact that we have to consider. On the other side, sport is today a multi-billion industry. According to the OECD conclusion on the leverage of economy of sport, sport is today more economic valuable than agriculture and fisheries. But considering this, we have to take into account that we have not the possibility to rule sport because we have the risk to invade the autonomy and the independence. What we can do is to understand how to avoid that this kind of approach could represent impunity, loopholes, and new ways for corruption and interests of criminal interests and network and corruption. This is the premise we have to consider. Taking this into account, traditionally, we have reconstructed, Drago, you perfectly remember our common engagement in this. And you also, as a referee, you are living the sport also on the field, not as me out of the field. We have traditionally different modality of threats and risks for sport, and corruption is a multifaceted threat for sport. We know all the illegal betting case, the match fixing phenomenon, the doping challenge, the disturbance of public procurement related to sport, last but not least, the corruption in the major public events adjudication. And if I well remember, there were a lot of investigations at global level on the adjudication of the major events. And I can think also on the Football World Cup, one of the most important, the second one for magnitude in respect of the Olympic Games. But today, we are living new threats that we have to take into account. And they are growing, and probably we are not prepared to consider. I'm referring to level. I'm a former prosecutor from Italy. I perfectly know the history, and every organized crime cartel and mafia has demonstrated the direct interest, it is in the documents and the evidence in trials, for sports sector, and in particular for football. And I can say that the four most important criminal organizations of Italy, we know they all have attempted to have the property of a soccer club, primary soccer club. The same happened in Latin America at the time of the cartel of Medellin, when Pablo Escobar Gaviria acquired the dominion of the primary football equipe in Colombia, demonstrating that this kind of phenomenon is not of an isolated country, but it's a global one. Today, we have evidences about the interest of Russian mafia to do the same, and also from Balkan mafia to do the same, and Eastern countries mafia to do the same. So, we are living a threat from organized crime to the sport. Is the sport sector prepared to defend itself? And what we can do to avoid this kind of phenomenon creating a threat, a theft for future of the clean sport? But I want to reserve the answer to this question to the next round. And for now, I stop here.
Thank you, Giovanni. Well, the idea is that you would, let's say, discuss all three questions already. So if you want, you can continue. Otherwise, we will get back to you after we finish with Dr. Master.
Of course, I go ahead with your authorization, and I maintain the logic line of the intervention. What I can answer is the only possible answer is on the culture of legality, the dissemination of value of legality, the value dissemination, the consensus building on rules inside the sports sector without affecting the autonomy and the independence of the sector as one only possible way: the compliance culture, the integrity in the private sector, the application of the rules in the organization at companies level and business level, with the control exactly in the same modality of the other sector of government and public sector, but in a second step. Without invading the autonomy and the independence of sport, we can create the basis for a new culture of legality. And this is the sense of the multi-stakeholder approach. Taking your invitation to cover also the other question, I can refer to something of more concrete in the evidences in our trials nowadays and investigation nowadays all around the world. What we are living in particular with reference to the criminality, the mafia and the cartels interest in sport is a lot of action of criminal networks to invade not only the professional sport, but also the amatorial one. And this is a new threat we are living, because cartels, mafia, criminal networks are searching for a social consensus to control territories and also infiltrate in politics. And one of the most important channels to have this kind of control of territory is exactly the amateur sport. They are acquiring also amateur football societies. And probably we have to resolve that there is not an economic interest to move this kind of behavior from mafias and cartels. What they are searching for, what they are looking for, probably exactly the consensus building. But on the reverse side, we have to build consensus on values. They are building consensus on the bad scenario, on the bad values. And to be more concrete, I can refer to some evidences in some trials on the interest of criminal organization in sport. What I'm calling a criminal organization, organized crime, is not only the violent mafia, not only the threatening mafia, but also the organized crime which infiltrates in economy through money laundering and in public administration through corruption. Is the liquid mafia. I'm using a metaphor. We had a sociologist from Germany, Zygmunt Bauman, speaking about the current shape of our society as a liquid one. Exactly the same to the organized crime. Is liquid today, is infiltrating the society, the economy, and the public administration. What we receive from the investigation as examples of this kind of infiltration. First, the management of sport clubs and sport facilities. Organized crime is looking to the management of sport clubs and sport facilities as a goal. And we have evidence on this, but we are not prepared to prevent this. Second, they control betting. And there is a growing phenomenon of match fixing, not only in football, but also in the other sports. It's the worst scenario we can imagine, but we have evidence about this. Third, last but not least, is a singular one, but I want to signal the ticket scalping in the major event of sport and the secondary ticketing activities and all the activities around the major sport events are and is a great quantity of evidence indicating us this by organized crime. And we have to ask to ourselves if we have complied, if we are complying with the prevention measures to avoid any modality of infiltration of organized crime in the sector of sport. Probably we have not realized, we have not the framework of and about what is happening in sport. And I try to go to the last question. One of the most important threats in sport is money. If we have a sector with so enormous exchange of money, you can realize the existence of a call to undo behaviors also from the athletes. And at the same time, we are living the final threat that criminality is posing to our planet nowadays. What is the ultimate scope of criminality? Is to create the basis for the cultural acceptance of corruption as a necessary evil. And I want to be clear on this. The bad message we are receiving also from media, some representations also in the reconstruction at general level of what happens in sport represent a bad example for future young generations, deprived of the dream of a clean sport, posed to in front of a geopolitic, and sorry to be clear on this, geopolitic infiltration of bad economy in the sport sector. If this is the most important challenge, the ultimate scope of criminality is to create the basis for a cultural acceptance of corruption. The only possible answer is to create consensus on the good values. And believe me, I'm spending my second part of my life in capacity building programs all around the world and trying to reduce the gap between countries, among countries, in preventing and fighting against organized crime. We have to change paradigm. We have to consider that mafia cartels are everywhere. They are not only issues, problems for one country or one region. We have evidences everywhere of the presence of cartels, mafias, all around the world. If you consider this, the only possibility we have is to shape. And I close, we have 4 different stages of intervention to help and support countries to getting better in organizing, in preventing this kind of threat. The first one is the capacity building. So I think that also the athletes have to be prepared and term of reference of capabilities on this. Second, institution building to make more efficient the sports organization and also the public administration involved in this kind of matter. Third one, law building, because sometimes you have great capacity, great institution, but the legal framework doesn't permit to prevent. And the last but not least step is the consensus building on the rule of law and the legality. If we ensure this kind of proposal and make it concrete, we can help and support also sports sector to prevent and better fight against corruption, organized crime, money laundering, and all this enormous threat. And thank you for now from my side.
Thank you, Giovanni. That was really interesting. You know, it doesn't happen very often that I, in being in the role of the moderator, would be surprised by the speeches of the speaker. But it really surprised me today when you said that the organized crime is also now penetrating not only professional but also the amateur sport. And you gave a very good explanation for that. You know, the organized crime trying to reach the social acceptability of corruption and other, let's say, bad behaviors. So the only remark, let's say, where I don't agree with you is you said that there's a dream of a clean sport. I never thought of that as a dream. I was hoping that sport is clean. But if the things continue as we are witnessing them today, then I'm afraid that many years we will really have to start speaking about the dream of a clean sport. Mr. Brakkeveld, Interpol is engaged heavily in the area of, let's say, raising integrity of sport or fighting corruption in sport. For many years, we see that basically Interpol was one of the first international organizations started to deal with the issue. So I'm sure you have rich experience in this area. And what would be your take on the, let's say, as basic guidance of the 3 questions which I asked at the beginning?
Thank you, Mr. Kos, for the introduction and for the questions also. And I presume everyone can hear me all right. So let me first of all congratulate SIGA and IACA for putting up this initiative. We see that it's part of basically a whole week of sessions, debates, webinars and exchanges. So also for us, raising awareness on risks, vulnerabilities in relation to sports is part of our mandate. As you introduced me, indeed, I'm in charge of capacity building and training for things related to integrity in sports. So there's a lot of work that we share in common and a lot of objectives that we have in common, including also with IACA. And actually, this is also an example of how IACA and Interpol can put into practice the memorandum of understanding that both of our organizations signed a couple of years ago. So my role is to build capacity within law enforcement, police, on match fixing and related corruption. And we are part of a recently established directorate, which has a clear focus on financial crime and anti-corruption, which specifically for the issue of manipulation and betting related manipulation is very, very helpful because of the approach where we try now to better service our member countries in conducting financial investigations and following the money trails that they can witness and that they can identify and relate to payments, money laundering, underlying various crime types. And allow me to also say that as part of our anti-corruption work, we have a focus on anti-doping, and I'm pleased to see here my newly arrived colleague, Francisco from Portugal, who will be taking up the anti-doping work more proactively in the near future. I'm sure he will be exchanging with all of you very soon. So what are the relationships that are more vulnerable to corruption? So as with so many experts here around, as everyone will know, it often relates to the misuse or the abuse of some form of power relation or power imbalance where such vulnerabilities are exploited. So of course, we think about athletes as victims, not only, but of course also can be involved, but let's say as targets. We can speak of coaches, but also sometimes Mr. Polcini spoke about the enormous amount of money that is involved in sports, and that's actually also very true. But the paradox sometimes is that, for example, in many of the European football leagues, also first-tier clubs, at the same time, they're all struggling to financially survive. So there's a bit of a paradox there, and again, that also adds to the vulnerability. So there's all sorts of power relations that unfortunately may be exploited, and just as Mr. Polcini also highlighted, one additional factor that we have to take into consideration here when we speak about sports is that sports indeed has a very unique place in society. It has a large degree of autonomy, which is recognized across most countries. A lot of those federations also are in fact monopolies. So over the last, I would say 10, 15 years following also police action in this area, very often a scandal needs to break, an investigation is where everything unfortunately starts, but then also leads to changes in governance, changes in legislation. So police intervention in this is important. It's about also, of course, if those are risks in relation to accountability. We know that sports many of them are embarking on big reform agendas when it comes to governance. So there's a lot of work that is actually ongoing. There's of course much more that needs to be done, but at least the debate on good governance in sports as a prerequisite to keep that autonomy is there. And I can also confirm to you that what we see in many national match fixing investigations is that very often sports organizations have a very important role to take. They know what happens in their sport. They are aware of suspicious betting activity within their sport. And they have very often also a disciplinary framework that can be very deterrent. If you're able to sanction players for 3, 4, 5 years, you can basically end a career. So again, also a call towards the sports and a call towards the importance of good governance, because without it is difficult to establish this type of partnerships. Because we believe that both action from police and public authorities, coupled also with responsibility and proactivity within sports, is important. So in relation to new trends and new crime types, we have a number of course, we receive information over our police channels from ongoing investigations that allow us to identify new modus operandi, new trends, etc. But I think the underlying drivers when it comes to betting related manipulation are still digitalization and globalization as such, that are creating this enormous ecosystem of a global sports betting market, which unfortunately is not sufficiently regulated, and also the regulation is very different across countries. And again, we mentioned the importance of sports as part of GDP, as being bigger actually than agriculture, for example. But actually the gambling markets are even bigger than the sports. So this creates obvious vulnerabilities. So what we see now is, again, of course, heavy competition for new markets. Latin America, Africa are the latest territories that also gambling companies want to conquer. Countries where, of course, sometimes the legal system is more vulnerable, is less robust, and our monitoring and our member states' feedback that we receive suggests for the last year, like really a massive uptick or increase in the number of suspicions of match fixing, but also investigation. So the betting markets, they are expanding horizontally across the globe, but they also go more deep. We speak about betting offer on youth league, friendly matches, sports events like that are also out of the realm of the regular governance. We have seen cases, witnessed cases, also publicly reported, where, for example, you can simply use a smartphone, a strong enough internet connection. You can organize any one-to-one racket sport. You can stream it over the internet, and you can organize a betting market on it. Very simple. This is, of course, very low level, but those are issues that have been reported. And of course, we are also aware that this, let's say, integration and development of sports betting in the next few years will be also driven by artificial intelligence. And of course, is both a risk, but also artificial intelligence. We have a couple of international working groups at Interpol that look into the use of artificial intelligence for detection, as well as investigation of financial crime, for example. So We of course need to be mindful and need to detect new crime types as we move along. So we always have to be vigilant. For example, also I'm just saying this because I see our distinguished friends and colleagues from the Greek police here as well. One initiative we take to remain basically aligned with the new trends and develop responses to that is that once a year we bring together our dedicated network of police experts. So we're going to meet next week in South America, and all our police members, they will bring with them their observations, their investigations they've done. And this is for us, of course, a unique opportunity to discuss and identify new crime types, new trends, etc. And then finishing on the third question related to the vulnerabilities of athletes. We've spoken about, of course, the financial vulnerabilities, with some betting markets being 5, 10, 20 times the salaries of some of the players involved. So there's obvious financial vulnerabilities. In some sports, the highest level of players and teams earns a lot, but below that there's immediately an enormous gap. So financial vulnerabilities, of course, are an important vulnerability factor. From an organized crime perspective, also, athletes are perceived as an easy target. Very often they are young, they are impressionable. They would move to a foreign country where they would be feeling lonely, where they need persons of trust, mentors, and all of that may be risk factors, of course, where they may be vulnerable for approaches. And often, of course, once they do agree to manipulate a small part of a game, they will feel trapped. They will have difficulty of speaking up, of using the reporting mechanisms, even if they are in place. So we're dealing with young people here, but also people or athletes that are at the end of their career, often are struggling to define the next chapter to their lives, try to stay on the circuit, and we also see some vulnerabilities there. They will also often be the intermediaries because they have developed a strong network within the sport, and those intermediaries with the significant network, with a training academy, for example, can also be targets or basically active corruptors. And finally, any vulnerability can be exploited. It can relate to, for example, prior doping use. It can be related to substance abuse. It can be people who are in debt, but the criminals will look for that type of vulnerabilities and try to exploit them. And finally, you can be strong and as morally principled as you are. We also see cases where, unfortunately, the governance is not going well, where there's indeed a bad area of corruption. And then when you are growing up in such an environment, it's of course very difficult to do the right thing. So I will leave it up to here for now, and I'm happy to stay on this call and reply to any further question you may have or any other issue that may come up for the debate. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Barker. Well, I was hoping that you will give us a bit more positive picture than Giovanni, but you did the opposite, but it's not your fault. Basically, this is how it is. You're just the mirror, let's say, conveying the information which you get through your work. You also pointed at something very important, which is the objective features of the current sport are sometimes incentivizing not only corruption, match fixing, but also some other misbehavior in sport. So let's say low salaries or the lack of salaries completely is something which is, let's say, a very strong element in influencing young athletes to join the ranks of the bad guys. So, Dr. Masters, let's say things are really I would not say getting worrying, because there have been worrying already for years. It also looks that despite the fact that you have more and more actors out there with the task to fight those features, that currently we are not winning the battle, but say we are not even keeping the draw. We are losing the battle. So in addition to the 3 questions asked at the beginning, what would you be your ideas how we can reverse and start winning too?
Thank you, Mr. Kos, and I'd like to thank the others on the panel, Mr. Brekeveld and Mr. Tartaglia, and of course SIGA and IACA for the invitation to be on this panel. The difficulty, of course, coming last and coming from an academic perspective is the people who precede you might steal some of your headlines. But I've taken these questions from a slightly different perspective. And your question just then about, are we winning the battle? Are we losing the battle? I think when you take a step back, it's a constant renewal of the battle. And I would say that because sports careers are so brief in somebody's life. Between the age of perhaps 8 when they start junior sport and when they're being, an athlete is being brought into professional sport is only a matter of maybe 10 years. And then an athlete is very, very lucky if they have a 10-year career in total. So we're seeing many athletes finishing by the time they're 28. And if they've been within the bubble of sport, where they're being told they're the greatest, they're the best, they're the good, we're not getting the long-term opportunities to bring people up to speed with ideas of ethics and integrity that we all have as, you know, people in their later 40s, 50s, 60s, where we've got much more experience on board. And this is where I think one of the big vulnerabilities lies, and it's something that Mr. Brekeveld touched on before, was this idea of digitization coming through. Social media is a game changer on so many levels, and it has been for nearly 20 years. But we've currently got a crop of athletes coming through who've known nothing but, you know, the millennials and the Generation Z, as they're referred to. And you can see the influence that social media can have on athletes. The most recent example that I picked up on, because I try to keep an eye on what's going on around the world, the American pole vaulter and Australian pole vaulter decided to share a gold medal at the World Championships recently. It was seen as a wonderful part of sportsmanship, as these two women decided that they weren't just going to push each other towards injury, but they were actually going to settle and share a gold medal. The American pole vaulter received a whole lot of abusive material over her social media accounts for being a loser, for not competing and the like. And this is an area of concern. We're talking about relationships that are vulnerable for corruption. I think the fan-athlete relationship is one that we need to tease out a little bit more. And quite often the fans, as Mr. Polcini and Mr. Brekeveld pointed out, are from organised crime groups as well. Yes, they're organised crime, but they are actually sports fans as well at the same time. And this fan-athlete relationship can be toxic, shall we say. People who are young within a community might be being introduced to organised.
Dr. Masters, we lost you. We see the picture which is frozen, but we can't hear you. Dr. Masters? Well, hopefully he will join us soon, but he also pointed out something important. First one, let's say the short career of any athlete, especially a professional one. And secondly, let's say the relation between the fans and the athletes. Well, fans have their expectations and their visions of what should sportsmen or athletes do, which do not always cope with what athletes really can do and what athletes are willing to do. Because, you know, being a professional athlete, you know best what is good for you, what's not, let's say, and what is not. So, which also means that we will also have to invest some energy not only in trying to train the athletes or the sports officials or say the managers, but I know this is happening already. We'll also invest some time and resources to train the supporters, not only in the sense of let's say proper behavior on the stadiums, but also in the sense of the expectations which they will have to control when it comes to what to expect from their idols in sport. You see, when I was a law enforcement officer, and this is still the case, we are always saying that we are lagging behind the bad guys. Now, when the technology is accelerating, new developments in the IT area, social media, and not even to speak about artificial intelligence, which is coming at us, I'm afraid that this, let's say, the difference between the bad guys and the good guys will become even better. So it would be really time to organize ourselves to start, let's say, investing in those new technologies, in the sense that we would not only try to prevent misuse of those technologies for the, let's say, malicious purposes, but also to use those technologies in our favor. We started thinking about that in the OECD years ago. We never got anywhere. Maybe, let's say, in this particular area of sport or the integrity of sport, we could do it. At least we have to try. Usually, let's say, the athletes, sports officials, but also the supporters are quite open to new technologies, and we should use that. But in the sense, as I've said, in the sense that we should figure it out how to use the new technologies in our favor, because I'm afraid otherwise, in not so many years from now on, we will really be only able to speak about dream of the clean sport, which Giovanni has mentioned. Dr. Masters, oh, you're back.
My apologies. That seems to be on my end.
No problem. I just repeated some of the things you said, so you just can continue.
Okay. Like I said, my apologies. I think things dropped out when I was talking about fan relationships and the problems with organised crime, growing up one-on-one with crime and athletes together. And we saw this in Australia with a rugby league player called Ryan Tandy, who was involved in a spot fixing scandal towards the end of his career. We see the relationship between fans of horse racing, particularly, being involved in all sorts of ways that create vulnerabilities in sport. One of the ones that I noted in Australia recently, and I was talking to somebody in our one of our racing integrity commissions, was that one of the senior members of the Race Integrity Tribunal was a part owner of a racehorse, and they were also a Supreme Court judge. And there's been a long connection between organised crime and the racing industry in Australia. And when I pointed out this interest between being a member of a criminal court and on a racing tribunal and being part owner of a horse in an industry that has very close connections to organised crime, the person couldn't see this conflict of interest because they were so close to being a fan of the sport that they couldn't see that there was anything particularly wrong in what they were doing. And we see this played out on boards as well within sporting clubs, where board members are also fans of the club and just can start ignoring wrongdoing when it happens. A breach of a salary cap is okay because it's going to help our club win the next championship, or that poor player behaviour or behaviour that is socially unacceptable by players is covered up or apologised for, which creates this, this air of wrongdoing within a sporting club. So when organised crime or somebody else approaches an athlete for match fixing, they don't have that sort of moral atmosphere, environment to lean back on and to lean on, because they know that this sort of thing can be acceptable. I won't keep going on about fans, but I think the fan relationship is one of the vulnerabilities that we don't look at carefully enough and often enough, and it does tie in to some of the broader pictures. The modern trends and the problems that we've seen as well, I'm sure that there are people who are closer to what's going on out there these days. I worked for an Interpol bureau for 10 years and I saw some very interesting things when I was there, and organised crime is very good at adapting and changing. A couple of things I will note: in India recently, there's been the government has made a move to increase taxation, value-added tax on gambling, the legal gambling, not the illegal gambling, from 18 to 28%. Within a day or two, one of the large illegal gambling networks was advertising that you're better off gambling with them because then you're not paying the tax and you're not paying tax on the winnings either. So moves to correct one problem can create another problem for us as well. Staying with India, there was quite an innovative case, if you appreciate organised crime and the innovation that they can actually be involved in, where they set up during COVID an entire cricket league, a false cricket league, claiming that it was a league being played in Sri Lanka. And the reality was it was a bunch of players on a cricket ground in India where the entire match was fixed. The players were fictional players. There was no fourth division league that this was involved with. And this was being streamed live over, I believe, YouTube at the time. So this sort of innovation and use of technology is a real kind of problem. We've also seen allegations a couple of years ago that Sport Radar, one of the main companies that looks at oversights gambling, had been infiltrated. They've denied this allegation as well, but the allegation was that some of the Italian mafias had actually got hold of a live feed for the data to set up their own sports gambling website, more to cover money laundering and manipulating the genuine sports data to create legitimate revenue, to launder the revenue, but quite likely also accepting bets on this site as well. And this was just to give it cover of legitimacy. So this level of sophistication we can't sort of ignore either. And finally, the key motivational factors. Now, Mr. Brekeveld mentioned money, Mr. Polcini mentioned money as well. I go back to the intelligence training that I had when I worked for the Federal Police, and I grew up during the Cold War, and one of my favourites, and I've always used this, is mice. What's the motivators for wrongdoing? What's the motivators for treason? Mice: money, ideology, coercion, and ego. Now, money's pretty obvious. The amount of money flowing through sport gambling is incredible. But money can have other means of influencing people. For a long time, US college athletes were divided between professional athletes and amateur athletes, and accepting any type of money at all could see you banned from athletic competition. Recently, the US Supreme Court has decided that the image, likeness, and name of an athlete, a college athlete, is something that they can actually trade on. So now you've got these amateur athletes able to make tens, hundreds of thousands of dollars, if not millions of dollars, in advertising revenue in a sporting market. Well, a market that is affiliated with sport rather than directly from the sport itself. And this is going to create distortions as well. And again, opportunities for exploitation to come through. And some of this ties into the idea, the core ideology of sport, which is winning. You know, people enter sports to win. There's also people who enter and play to compete, but at the elite level, at the level that's pushing the cutting edge, winning is one of the main ideologies. And we can see the rule books getting thrown out in pursuit of this ideology. And this might come back to money, where point shaving, for example, you can still win a game, but you can influence a gambling market without actually losing. And this is attractive to some people. Ideologies can stretch beyond just winning. National pride can become an ideology, or team pride. You know, think about Lance Armstrong with his cycling and the doping that he was involved in, or the Russian athletics doping case as well. This was about the country being seen as a winner, not necessarily just the athlete. Coercion, this is part of the darker side of sport, and organised crime is generally defined by a willingness to use violence. And we've seen violence used against players and athletes around the world who've tried to refuse or take a moral stand against corruption or wrongdoing. This coercion can take other forms as well. You know, if somebody has used illicit substances at any time in their career, somebody else knows about it. Sexuality can be used as leverage, particularly in very masculine-dominated sports. If somebody's homosexual and their homosexuality can still be used against them because it might be something that could destroy their career, depending what the sport is, depending which culture they're in, depending which country they're in. Other embarrassing relationships can be used to coerce somebody to act in a way that's wrong. And it's not just athletes. I've been talking mostly about athletes, but this can also be sports managers, sports administrators, sporting bodies in all sorts of places. And the final one, ego. I don't have any psychological qualifications, but people involved in sport quite often have large egos. When you think back to Muhammad Ali's constant claim that he was the greatest. And this idea that you will maintain that greatness by engaging in some type of wrongdoing or some type of corruption in sport, I think is something that we need to keep in mind. So that's pretty much what I have to say. I've shifted from the world of practitioner to academic, and I've surprised myself by sounding more like an academic than every day. I've been 10 years out of the practice space, but I hope my contribution has helped people's thinking on what can and can't be done. Thank you.
Well, thank you. It did help for sure. You know, it was just a, let's say, beautiful supplement to what we just heard from Johan and Mr. Brekkevel. No, and I'm sure that everybody now, from now on, will know what MICE means. Special because this is the, let's say, the three remaining elements, ICE, are not taken into account always when we discuss, let's say, the motivation of people from sport to engage in wrongdoings. But also other features, let's say other cases which you presented show clearly how sophisticated, how innovative the bad guys could be. So you heard, and I will speak to the all participants. We heard all our three speakers with their valuable inputs. They went much further than just responding to the three basic questions, which I think is good. They made me think a lot. I hope they made you think a lot too, and the thinking will not stop when we stop today's, let's say, the first session. But we still have some minutes for possible questions. So if anybody would like to ask a question, please just raise your hand in the system, and I'll try to find you out somewhere because my screen is full of faces. And just tell us who you are and whom would you like to address the question to. I'll have to ask the IACA secretariat to help me with that because for the moment, I don't see any hands up, but I don't know if this is really the case. Well,
there are no hands up, but there are two questions in the Q&A section. The first question is, what new challenges or corruption risks, if any, in your opinion, are being brought by the increased and sizable investment in sports, for example, European markets, football from nations in the Middle East, or those with higher perceived corruption risks?
Any of our three speakers would like to answer to this one? So why is more money in sport important for as incentive? What do we see new? Giovanni?
Yes, only one word to answer to the first question. How to answer to the threat, the growing threat. We all know the crucial role of the beneficial ownership transparency, in particular in the ownership of the sport companies and every actor in the in all the anti-corruption arena, the relevance of accuracy and timely registers at the national level with the possibility for stakeholders to understand who is the owner, who is exactly the owner, and who decide about policies, strategies, and actions of companies. And I think that in sports sector, that's crucial more than also in the other ones. And that's all from my side.
Thank you. Mr. Brakkeveld, Dr. Masters, go on.
Yes, I was just going to follow up that it's nearly 20 years ago, the Financial Action Task Force described the football transfer market as something that money launderers could have designed in and of themselves. I think the ideas of the way the corporations, which football organisations operate, need to more align with corporate governance structures than sports governance structures. And at the beginning, we talked about there was discussion on the autonomy of sport, but if they're working as corporations, corporate governance really needs to apply. And I would agree with Mr. Polcini's comments that ultimate ownership and beneficial ownership is part of the transparency that's needed around sporting organisations. And transparency is key at all sorts of levels. Who's being hired? How are they being hired? Where is the money coming from? Where is the money going to? Is there actual value in some of the stuff that goes on? I mean, you transfer a player from country A to country B for a $50 million fee. Is that player worth $50 million, or is that $50 million payment for something else? These are the sorts of things we need to consider and think about.
Yeah, what's the next question? That will also be the last question for this panel, Lara. The next question in the Q&A.
Yes, the next question is, women's sport is seeing dramatic and long-awaited growth across various sports, which is being accompanied by an increased investment and rise in betting. Due to disparities that exist in women's sport with regard to pay and investment going to serve to increase the vulnerability of corruption in women's sport.
Thank you. Anyone?
Now, let me just follow up on the first one. I can only echo what Mr. Porcini and Adam said is basically the importance of the due diligence. And indeed, we have indeed also seen cases where people try to gain ownership over football clubs, either for hiding other types of transactions or carrying out their manipulations. With regards to the women's football, yes, I think it's again something to be wary about. The latest figures we had following our participation in the task force related to the Women's World Cup was a very high increase in sports betting on women's football, which as such, of course, is not necessarily a problem, but it does bring with it a couple of risks, and we have indeed been aware of attempts of manipulation in women's football. And again, we haven't been here to be to paint a grim picture, but I think the obvious. I mean, there's obvious economical and other vulnerabilities, and we just need to be aware of them and be realistic. They're a constant threat, and that strong enforcement by all actors is really needed. is really needed to keep the dream of sport alive.
Thank you. Well, we are 2 minutes over the deadline, so let's finish. And first of all, let me thank the three speakers. We all learned a lot today. You gave us a lot of food for thinking, and I would like to thank you for that. And what is even more important is the following. You know, for many years we are discussing the issue of corruption or other, let's say, wrongdoings in sport. And sometimes I have the impression that not only that we are sitting in different boats, but only that also that we are sitting on different islands. But not today. Not today. So we heard what is going on. We heard some ideas how to continue, and the best thing to do would be just to pick up on some of those ideas and try to, let's say, enhance the effectiveness of all of us who are fighting for the higher integrity of sport. So thank you once again, Giovanni, Mr. Brackevel, Dr. Masters. Thanks to all participants, and we have 10 minutes of a break now.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Anti-Corruption and Compliance in Sports Forum. In our second panel, we will hear from our experts about enabling integrity and compliance to safeguard sports. This panel will be moderated by Mr. Pawan Kumar Sinha, who is the Director of Academic Programs at the International Anti-Corruption Academy since 2018. He oversees the development and implementation of IACA's academic programs, such as IACA's 4 master's programs, the postgraduate certifications, and open online training programs. He is a member of UNODC's Anti-Corruption Academic Initiative, ACAD, and the current curator of the World Economic Forum's Transformation Map on Corruption under the IACA Parsi collaboration. He teaches courses on asset recovery, corruption in customs, collective action, the economics of corruption, the role of technology in anti-corruption, and corporate social responsibility and corruption. Before joining IACA, he had a career in the civil service in India, in the Ministry of Finance, Customs and Indirect Taxes, spanning almost 3 decades. Mr. Pawan Kumar, the floor is yours, please.
Thank you, James, so much for a nice introduction. Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished panelists, first let me tell you that I'm so proud of SIGA and IACA cooperation, and I'm very happy to be here today to moderate this panel during this Sports Integrity Week. We have heard a lot about what happened and what is happening in sports, what are the problems. The previous panel has discussed many issues, right from sports manipulation, e-games which have coming up, the problems in the field of sports where the women's sports is concerned. So now it is time that this panel is going to look into the efforts which have been made so far, what action has been taken and what action can be taken in future, because this is the area which we need to really look into to clean up the arena of the sports. Before starting, let me introduce my panelists. Here, first we have got Emilio Garcia Silvero. He is a Chief Legal and Compliance Officer in FIFA since 2018. He is currently responsible for all FIFA legal and compliance matters. He is the former legal director of Spanish Football Federation and former UEFA Managing Director of Integrity. At UEFA, he led the disciplinary, anti-doping, and anti-match manipulation departments and acted before the CAS as UEFA's leading counsel for sports arbitration matters. His academic background includes a doctorate in law and 2 master's degrees in sports law and European law governance. Next, we have Mr. Edward Ivanov, my colleague at IACA. He is the senior researcher here. Dr. Ivanov is a senior researcher and he has a solid academic and practical experience in compliance, combating corruption, anti-money laundering, and financing of terrorism. Mr. Ivanov lectured as a visiting professor at different universities world over, in Brazil, in France, in Germany, and in Italy. Next, we have Mr. Norbert Rubisek, is director of CSCF Sport Integrity Group. Mr. Norbert is a lawyer and a former police officer specialized in organized crime issues, notably the sport-related integrity and criminal issues. He was one of the founding members of the AP Sports Corruption of Europol, a specialized unit handling sports corruption issues at European Police Office, as well as a delegate and member of the Interpol Match Fixing Task Force for several years. He is also founding director of CSCF Sports Integrity Group, focusing on consultation on operational, strategic, and policy-making issues, and developing education, prevention, and risk management programs to national and international sports federation, and as well as the law enforcement, judicial authorities, and lotteries on the topic of sports integrity. So I welcome again all the panelists here, and just to let you know that we will try to keep about 15 minutes at the end for the Q&A session. But in the meanwhile, I would go with the 3 questions. And the way I will conduct I'll tell one question, and then I'll ask all the panelists to respond, and then we will go to the next question. In between, if we have some counter questions, we can take it as it goes. So my first question, Mr. Norbert, I can start with you. And I'm reading out the question, and all panelists can answer. In your opinion, what are the most effective strategies or best practices for promoting integrity and preventing corruption in a sports organization?
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you very much for the invitation, and thank you very much for the question, Mr. Sina. So I'm going to start my my thoughts coming from the rather from the operational angle of misconduct in sport, in special emphasis on sports manipulation, or we can call from the other angle corruption, fraud, and money laundering. And I would start. So basically, what I do believe is that one of the most important and the best preventing possibility is proactivity. And the proactive approach is one of the proactive approach is, I think, what it's supposed to be, but how we're supposed to handle such issues. And I'd like to tell you a very nice story, which really helped me to even more believe in this approach. We had a program where we had discussions with young athletes, and one of the football players we had a discussion with, and I was asking him whether he knows what sports manipulation is. That was a simple question, and the gentleman answered absolutely perfectly. And I was asking, how do you know that? And this gentleman said that when he was 12, at his club, their educators arrived, and they provide him education on sport, specifically on sports manipulation. And he didn't remember, he admitted he didn't remember everything, but it was given. But what was very important, he remembered what sports manipulation is and why it had to be avoided. And this is something which I think is very important and shows what I think, which direction we should go, which is to provide education on integrity and ethical issues for young athletes. The younger and earlier, the better. And I do believe that it should be part of an education of a sport federations as this part. How I think it could be also handling this issue proactively is first understanding the situation. So whenever some sports federations are approached and the sports federation has to deal with this issue, then they have to understand the situation. What is really the problem in that specific sports federation? Then also raising awareness to people concerned, whether it is the sport, so the athletes, or the players, or the management, or whoever is involved in, but they have to be educated. They have to have a structured education program on this specific issue, and also approach the specifically for the more vulnerable population of the sport federation. Specifically, I'm talking about youth. But when it comes to raising awareness, it's also possible. The possibility. It is also important to give this kind of knowledge for other organizations who actually can help the sports federations or the sports entities to handle such issues. And I'm talking about specifically on law enforcement, on judiciaries, and also other governmental organizations or other private stakeholders who can help to tackle the issues with which criminals can attack sports. And also the last one is foster cooperation. I do believe that this is very, very important, not only within the sports federation or within the country, but also it is very important to actually trigger this cooperation amongst countries, because this specific issue, unfortunately, has no borders.
Thank you so much. Indeed, catching them young is very important for any anti-corruption measures or integrity measures. But I'd like to hear the same questions from Mr. Garcia Silvero. What's your view about the effective strategies, or if you have any best practices which I've heard about in the field of integrity in sports, you can share with us.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Mr. Sina. Good to see familiar faces. Norbert, long time no see you. So it's always nice to see you again. And thanks to SIGA for this kind invitation. I would like to echo the comments made by Norbert. Education is a key pillar in this area when it comes to preventing corruption or promoting integrity in sport. And this is something that I've been doing when I was at UEFA for 6 years, a lot of programs and education activities with players, with the football associations, with the football stakeholders. So education is obviously a key pillar. This is also vital in the current FIFA's strategy against match manipulation on anti-doping. We are doing more or less the same, replicating the same programs, being close to the players, being close to the coaches, referees. So the referees are also a vital part of sport, and they need to be educated. So the last FIFA Women's World Cup took place in Australia and New Zealand. So we were there, not only with the task force, monitoring the betting markets, but also teaching the referees, teaching the FIFA officials, and also the players. So the players were educated before moving to going to the World Cup in the respective MAs with the FIFA integrity officers. So education is vital. At the same time, the disciplinary code or the code of ethics, so the so-called enforcement package, the sanctions are also relevant, because sanctions can have an effect, a deterrent effect in the world of sport. So if we are strict, if we apply the rules, if the community see is that we are strong when rendering cases, and we take the cases very seriously, we can prevent others from committing offenses. So that's why education is vital. Sanctions are also vital. So the disciplinary committees, the code of ethics in the respective federations, and in combination with a proper legal framework. So you need rules and robust rules and regulations in order to protect sport from corruption and all these kind of activities. That's why, for me, these three factors: education, sanctions, plus a robust legal framework are the key pillars in order to promote not only integrity, also to prevent corruption in sports organizations.
Thank you so much. Indeed, code of ethics, we in anti-corruption, we call it the deterrent theory, like if we deter, then we prevent. So it's a good approach, I must say. And now I will hear the same question from Dr. Edward Ivanov. Edward, floor is yours.
Thank you, Pawan. Thank you, dear colleagues. So, dear colleagues, dear participants, good afternoon. I'm very glad to participate in this very interesting panel and to also share some ideas which we developed in the International Anti-Corruption Academy. So the first panel discussed various, I would say, phases of corruption in sports, how the corruption looks like, and modern trends in corruption in sports and challenges we have. And in this second panel, we discuss how to deal with this issue and what could be done. First of all, I would say that it's important to implement effective and efficient anti-corruption compliance programs and integrity programs in sports organizations. And we can consider several factors when we discuss, design, and implement anti-corruption compliance programs. First, the definition of corruption. What is corruption in sports? Of course, when we discuss corruption in sports, first of all, we think about specific forms of corruption, such as match fixing or participation in illegal betting. But of course, corruption in sport is not limited to these specific forms. And we should also consider common corrupt practices, such as violation in the procurement process, or acting in the situation of conflict of interest, or a violation in the process of election or hiring staff members. It's not necessarily that the manager of sport organization will be approached to fix the game. He or she may be approached, for example, to help in the procurement process. And it may be the starting point for the engagement in corruption relationships. And later on, when criminals already know, okay, this person is already there, sure, he is involved in corruption, they can approach the same person with different proposals, for example, to fix the game, to contribute to illegal betting industry, or commit any other type of crime. Therefore, I would say we have to use a broad definition of corruption when we design integrity and compliance programs in sport organizations in different levels, would it be the International Sport Federation or National Sport Organization or Sport Club. So second point, what we have to consider when we design the compliance program, we should look at typologies of corruption offenses and related types of crime, for example, money laundering. We should understand how criminals plan their activities, especially when we are talking about financial crime, complicated money laundering schemes. We should understand this technical part of the process. But of course, it's not enough to focus on the technical side. We can draft brilliant compliance programs. We can invest a lot of funds in buying various IT tools, solutions, programs. But at the end of the day, we have an individual who in particular situation should decide how to act, to accept bribe or not, to pay bribe or not, to participate in the match fixing scheme or not. So it means we have to also analyze this behavioral part of the problem, look at the incentives, try to understand why particular athletes or managers or coaches participate in corrupt relationships, and what kind of incentives can we create to prevent participation of various stakeholders in corrupt relationships. So I would say we should consider this motivational part and also technical part. In addition, I would like to add that it may be useful for sports organizations to consider experience of the business sector in designing, implementing, maintaining, and evaluating compliance programs. Even in the business sector, it's not so easy. We conducted at IACA an analysis of more than 40 various anti-corruption compliance standards and guidance published by various stakeholders, the UNODC, World Bank, OECD, etc. And it's very difficult to design compliance program based on numerous standards. But I would say that compliance in the business sector is very well developed, and some ideas can be also useful for sports organizations to prevent common corrupt practices. Finally, I would say that there are some common corrupt practices in all sports, but there are also specific corrupt practices. Our colleagues in the first panel discussed, for example, the use of new technologies from positive and negative side, new opportunities for the prevention of corruption, and also new risks related to the use of new technologies. I was really surprised, I never thought about before, the president of the International Chess Federation in his interview mentioned that in chess game, the use of artificial intelligence can be compared with the use of doping in other sports. We don't think about this from this perspective usually, but we should also consider new risks and new challenges we may have when we apply new technologies. I will stop here and we'll be happy to answer other questions.
Okay, since we have still more time, maybe in the first questions, regarding first question, I have a counter question from Mr. Silvero and Rubisek. We heard in the previous panel about the fan-player relationship and how it is, it causes a kind of pressure. Do you have any kind of experience and how you have managed such kind of case which you may have come across by any chance, Mr. Garcia?
Not particularly, I have to admit. So, I cannot remember a single case related to this. Of course, this is something that can happen, but at least in my experience, in the Spanish FA, I have to admit that at that time, the phenomenon of match fixing was not so popular and was not there often. Now it's a little bit different, but neither in UEFA nor now at FIFA, I've been close to this situation, honestly.
Okay, Mr. Rubisek.
I just like to join Emilio that I haven't had any case where someone was actually involved in such issues because he was acting as a spectator. Of course, it could happen that someone who is a spectator or as a fan could be involved in such issues, but not. I haven't seen anything in that when he or she uses this role. However, I wouldn't say that I do believe that they indeed have to be involved in the solution. So basically the supporters of the sport organizations have to understand the rules and the values of these federations and have to support them fully in this, because without them it's much more difficult to actually handle such issues.
Thank you. This is particularly linked to the second question. That's why I asked it, because even Edward mentioned about behavioral side, and that is part of the solution. So my next question is, what are the key motivational factors that can prevent engagement in misconduct in the sports? So maybe I'll start with Mr. Garcia Silvero first. What could be how do you motivate people not to engage in malpractices or engaging in any kind of misconduct?
Well, it's a difficult question, I have to admit. No, I could say that obviously the first motivational factor should be that those who are involved in sport should respect the rules. So respecting the rules must be one of the key factors, no, when you are involved in sports. So it's like playing with fair play values, no? This is the typical word in sport, fair play. So fair play is something that it is attached, linked to a sport, and this is the first value that we need to respect when we play football, basketball, hockey, or whatever. So fair play is important. It's important when it comes to anti-doping. It's important when it comes to match fixing. It's important when it comes to other aspects of sport. So for me, if you ask me about the key motivational factor in singular, I would say, or I would promote the principle of fair play. So we are here, either if you are amateur or professional, you know, we have certain values in sport, and you have to respect this value. And the principal value is playing with fair play. So respecting the rules. So the statutes, the anti-doping regulations, the match fixing guidelines or manuals. So fair play is for me the most important motivational factor. And as Robert highlighted in the beginning, the earlier we can transmit the message, the better for the project. So, you know, when we can interact with young players, so under 15, under 16, so those who are still amateurs, but in the future will become professionals, those who are young and can absorb the message is obviously better for the whole project. No? So, and that's why education with young athletes is something particularly important in this area, particularly to prevent engagement in misconduct in sports.
Okay, same question goes to Norbert Rubisek.
Thank you very much. So again, I'm going to try to explain my point of view from the pitch or the sport play. So basically that specific area, rather than as Eduard said, that the little bit broader kind of sport corruption definition. And I actually want to turn around the question to try to answer to you, which is what are the key motivational factors that can lead to engagement in misconduct in sport? And as you could see, we had this answer already at the previous panel. One of the first question was money. That's one of the things, but of course lead to this this misconduct. And the next one I want to see, based on my experience in leading such programs, is of course lack of security in life, which again goes back to the money issue, where the athlete is not secure, it does not feel secure in their position. Of course, they can be vulnerable for any type such issues. And also, a very, very important point, I believe, is lack of understanding of reality. This is something which I keep facing with, that sometimes especially when I'm talking about athletes, they believe of something when they're going to become an athlete, this is going to happen, and sometimes. Most of the time, it does not happen as they plan, and this is something which could create quite a big frustration. And based on this, there is a very very important point which I just like to refer back to Emilio, that the problem is that the persons in question need to understand the rules and the regulations. They have to understand that what they do is actually not good. It's actually some misconduct in sport, and this. But I also see several times that not only athletes, but specifically athletes, they are not aware of that their activities actually are not in line with the regulations. And this is something. The problem is that since they are not taught to this specific regulations, what they do is they follow the procedures or follow the acts, how they see it from their fellow athletes or the fellow sportsmen. And it might happen to, again, lead to engaging misconduct, which is and that's become a main act. So this is something which is something very, very, could be a very big problem. So how I see is that another thing is that in sport field, as usual, as I got used to when I was police officer, the persons would like to help to keep the balance in a specific word. They are not always the most popular people. It's just because this is how they get used to be defined, that they are not. Although they are there to actually help and protect the people who try to live in that specific environment. So I think it's very important in this solution to understand, to make the sport world understand that the people at the integrity sector, the legal sector, they are there for helping them instead of making any trouble with them. And that's one of the last point what I'm thinking to mention here is that I think the solution could be the continuous presence of the people from the integrity sector or the integrity unit or of the specific sport organization, and also not only the appearance but also their support towards the athletes, that and also the sportmen, that they know that there is a person who they can turn to, and if they have any problem, if they have any misconduct they want to report, or they just want to be safe. And this is something which I think is a very important point, and this is something which direction we are going now, because what can be seen that there is finally, it's not finally a growing culture of recognition that those who report should be protected. So we are going to that direction, but that's what I see could be the possibility of this the solution of this issue.
Now, floor is yours, Edward.
Yeah, thank you very much. Actually, first of all, I fully agree with my colleagues in the panel. It's important to promote rules, and athletes and other stakeholders should be aware of rules that exist in various sports, because it's not always the case. But in addition, of course, it's important to have reporting mechanisms and raise awareness about the reporting framework, basically what may happen if they report, because sometimes there is a hotline, would it be email or phone number or something like this, the web page of the organization, and athletes or other stakeholders have an opportunity to report. They know basically how to report, but they're not sure what will happen if they decide to report. They should be aware of the existing protection mechanisms. They should be certain that the organization will provide them with the necessary support and will protect them if they decide to report. It's especially challenging for young athletes to report such types of misconduct. And in addition to that, it's important to raise awareness among young athletes and their parents about misconduct and reporting channels, plus promote this culture, speak up culture among athletes and other stakeholders. It's not easy to report sometimes because you have to report to your colleagues, your friends, and your team who are involved in misconduct. And you have to take this difficult decision. Therefore, it's great to have some kind of good examples of famous athletes, of other respectful persons in sports who can tell, okay, this is normal. We should play according to fair play rules and report misconduct. So I will stop here. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Edward. I think very valuable suggestion. Of course, the previous panel set up exactly motivational factor, what leads to misconduct. And there now we have to look into, and you have rightly pointed out, various things which leads to, and then, what are the countermeasures. Last question is more on compliance side, and then I have more other questions which I can also pose before we have two questions I can see on the chat, on the Q&A. The last question is, how can international organizations and sports federations support integrity and compliance in sport? So maybe we'll start now with Edward, first you, or okay, but first let me, Mr. Garcia, and then I think Edward, you can be in the end.
Yes, thank you.
Mr. Garcia.
Thanks. Well, to what extent or how can sports federations support integrity and compliance in sport? I think that the first factor here is leading by example. No, it's difficult to teach others how to do or how to prevent this if the institution, the international organization, or the International Sport Federation are not leading this matter by example. That's why, in order to do this, you need your robust compliance program in place. You need your robust corporate sport governance inside the organization or the institution or the sport federation. Your balances and your counterbalances, you need a proper disciplinary committee in place in order to deal with misconducts, an independent committee. You need your code of ethics and your ethics committee, an independent ethics committee to deal with these matters. So these are the kind of measures that can be seen as factors to promote integrity, because it's definitely difficult to promote integrity and to convince others about making programs in compliance or in anti-match fixing or in anti-doping when the organization is not leading the system by example. And that's why first you need a proper organization behind, a robust organization behind, and then with the appropriate tools like the corporate governance, compliance program, and independent judicial bodies, you can start thinking about something doing meaningful. That's basically my idea.
Thank you so much. Same question, Mr. Rubisek.
Thank you very much. I just wanted to say that we did not meet with Emilio before this meeting, but I have to tell you that what I'm going to talk about is rather a little bit higher level of policy making and lower level of technical assistance, what he was mentioning here. So we're going to most probably cover the entire field in this specific sense. So how I see this is that so we have indeed several places where international organization and international and national sports federation can help, specifically about when it comes to the international organization and international sports federations is the policy making, the international policy making. So I'm just listing some organizations who have certain regulations which is compulsory or which is offered to the countries to tackle sport integrity, such as the European Union, such as the Council of Europe, or the UNODC. They have this multidisciplinary solution for all type of stakeholders and provide this solution to actually tackle corruption in sport. The other, what I can see is the sports federations such as FIFA, who has their own engagement, first of all, in the international organizations and the international treaties, but also the internal policies, as Emilio mentioned, which are actually helping within the organization to sort out such issues. The other thing, the other part, what I was thinking to mention is the technical assistance. So basically, the support of implementation of such regulations, international or national frameworks. And this is, for instance, where my organization come into picture, because this is where we provide our programs. I was mentioning about mostly proactive programs what we provide. For instance, one's called IntegriSport, which is an education program for law enforcement, judiciaries, and other stakeholders in countries where basically it's an awareness raising possibility for these stakeholders to understand crime in sport. So different angles, different aspects, through different angles and different aspects, they actually understand this. And we do, for instance, other technical assistance. For instance, one's called IntegriBall. This is something which provides education specifically on match fixing, for instance, to to athletes in vulnerable position, specifically youth and women football players, and this is tailor-made program for them. So what to do, how to discover issues if it happens, what to do, and how to deal with these issues and why. And by mentioning this here, I also wanted to mention that within these programs and also other technical assistance programs, I could see greatly international organizations such as Interpol, such as Council of Europe, the national Olympic committees, national football associations, FIFA, UEFA, who come up and give their technical knowledge on how to tackle such issues.
Thank you so much. Now the third question also goes to you, Edward, and we'd like to hear from you.
Thank you very much, Pawan. Yes, I fully agree, first of all, with points made by my colleagues. I believe that international organizations and international sports organizations can contribute a lot to the promotion of integrity and compliance in sports. And I believe that this event is a good example of cooperation between professional international sports organizations and the International Anti-Corruption Academy that has a strong expertise in anti-corruption and compliance. IACA joining forces with professional international sports organizations to safeguard sport from corruption. And this year we started a research project on integrity and anti-corruption compliance in sports that is very practically oriented, and the final goal is to deliver practical tools that may be useful for international national sport organizations, professional leagues and clubs. In particular, we analyzed the typologies of corruption offenses, which I have mentioned in my previous speeches, to describe, let's say, technical side of corruption in sports and related types of crime, including money laundering and the infiltration of organized crime. Then we are going to analyze these behavioral parts, the motivational factors for engagement in corruption, and motivational factors that can prevent engagement in corruption relationships for various categories of stakeholders, for athletes, for managers, for coaches, for investors, etc. And then we are analyzing integrity and compliance programs of sports organizations to identify best practices that may be useful for the other organizations and for different actors involved in relationships in sports, not only sports organizations and athletes, but also sponsors, donors, TV channels, and etc. And of course, based on this, we will provide you with training and technical assistance. We look forward to develop cooperation with relevant sports organizations and law enforcement bodies and international law enforcement organizations such as Interpol, first of all. And I know that colleagues from various international sports federations participate in this event. We are very happy with this, and I also would like to use this opportunity to invite legal and compliance officers of sport federations and organizations participating in the event today to schedule later on meetings with the IACA's team and to discuss opportunities for cooperation. We really would like to contribute to promoting integrity and compliance in sport and to safeguarding sport from corruption. And we are ready to do all the best to share our knowledge and experience and to contribute to your efforts. Thank you so much. And I also would be happy to answer questions if colleagues participating in the event have such questions.
Thank you so much. Let's take some questions. I think there are 3 questions in the Q&A. The first question is, there have been calls for international agency against all forms of corruption in sports, similar to WADA, the doping thing, in its anti-doping efforts. What are your opinions of such an organization? Would this provide a further push to sport organization to prevent corruption and invest in mitigating corruption risks? Any of the panelists can go ahead.
Okay, if I may, I will start kicking the ball. I think that theoretically the idea is good. I have the opinion that you cannot compare doping with match fixing for multiple and several factors, mainly because, you know, when it comes to WADA and anti-doping, the fight against anti-doping, you have a clear system in place led by the test simple A and simple B, something that is not exactly the same when it comes to match manipulation or the fight against match fixing. So there are some analogies, but it's not automatic to say, you know, when it works for anti-doping, WADA will work for match manipulation. This is my first point. But I think that theoretically, the idea might be considered. And my second point is more political, no, and it's the situation that we are facing with the international treaties dealing with match fixing, no, the Council of Europe. So an international treaty that face a lot of problems in Europe is still waiting for being ratified in certain areas, in certain countries. So the fight against match fixing is vital, but the reality shows us that for whatever political problems that I don't know, the Council of Europe International Treaty is still there and should be ratified by a lot of countries. And, you know, it was approved long time ago, years ago, and still today in 2023, there are problems between the states and the European Union and all the states. So I think that we are far from seeing this WADA in match fixing as a real project. Not only because, again, the analogy is not perfect, also because from a political standpoint, it is definitely complicated.
Anyone else? Thank you so much.
It's hard to actually add more things because Emilio covered almost everything. I just wanted to add one thing. Exactly, with the doping, the regulations and the doping policies, they are really well settled and established. When it comes to the sports manipulation situation, the very first case when everything actually started officially, when it officially became a huge issue, it was 2013. 4th of February. So that was the very first day when it became officially a big issue. So we basically have just 10 years to settle everything, and we still have a lot of things to understand about this specific topic. And as soon as this topic is going to be more solid as it is at doping, I think that's where it could be an interesting time to think about this organization.
Edward, do you have any views?
Yeah, for one, I would like to add, actually, I would say that it's of course interesting idea, as colleagues already mentioned, but I think that first of all we have to analyze the mandates of existing international organizations and think about what can be added value, what kind of mandate this new organization may have, and what is missing in mandates, in functions of existing organizations. What would be the role of this organization? If it's the role of standard setting, if this is the role of investigations, I mean, not of course criminal investigations, but some kind of internal investigations. If it's the role of kind of technical assistance or support, first of all, we need a serious analysis, and then based on this, we can decide. I mean, say we are in the international community can decide, the countries can decide if it really makes sense to establish a new organization, or probably the existing organizations can take additional functions or responsibilities, or even implement properly already existing tasks that they have. So this is my view on this.
Okay, from the questions, it also appears that there is a kind of appeal to say that there can be a movement of against corruption, the way it was done in the case of anti-doping, and against doping. So maybe yes, why not? Because this is the time when we discussed a lot that corruption is, as Mr. Dragokos mentioned, are we losing or winning the battle? I don't think we should either say winning or losing. We should remain in the battle. That's most important, and then fight it out as a movement. There is already so many movements, sports movement going on, and against corruption, of course, it's necessary. Just to add few things, which maybe I can get, because we have 10 more minutes, so we can have some more questions. Because Mr. Norbert, you spoke about proactive actions, and that is what compliance is. So we talk about these compliance programs basically to prevent. So I think this is the time when we can have more and more federation. That was one of the last question, who can join hands basically, because what we have also noticed, and I have got big figures, like the big federations have huge revenue, and there are many federations who are lacking revenue. So unless the federations join hand and take it as a movement and give those support to those other federations, other sports bodies, clubs, generating a kind of universal compliance program, which was mentioned also in the first panel. Don't you think that can be a some kind of solution? Because after all, compliance programs are costly. It's easy to say that we will run programs, we'll do training, we'll communicate, but how to do it? Who will do it? So what do you think? What's your view on that?
I like to pass the ball to. I'm sorry to actually not avoiding the question, but we have a gentleman from an international anti-corruption agency who they are dealing with compliance, and also the lead legal of an international sport organization who they have the compliance program. So I think my addition would be less valuable than what they would talk about it. So if you're okay with that, I just pass the ball to them.
Then I can pass it on to Mr. Garcia for what do you think as a concept? I'm not saying it has been done or should be done, but as a concept, how you think that there could be a kind of collective action, joint forces, who can build kind of universal program and give it to different bodies who cannot afford to do it otherwise.
Yeah, this is also a possibility. I think that the IOC, International Olympic Committee, can play a role here. So, they are the supreme organization in sports. So the international federations are affiliated to the International Olympic Committee. They play a role and they do a lot of things. So they have an anti-match manipulation department. They have a working group in place. We are also in contact with them when it comes to match fixing or ethics. So I think that this might be the role for us, this supreme institution that is the International Olympic Committee. Definitely, yeah.
Edward.
Yeah, I would say that compliance and integrity programs in sports organizations are absolutely necessary. Of course, it's costly to implement compliance, but we already came through this experience in the business sector that non-compliance is much more expensive. And I would say that this may be the role for international sports federations and also for international organizations such as the International Anti-Corruption Academy to provide support to national federations, to regional sports organizations and sport clubs in developing various standards, recommendations, and overviews of best practices to simplify the process of designing and implementing compliance programs. I would say it's also useful to look at the experiences of various sports and best practices in various sports, because some federations have more and some other less experiences in the implementation of compliance and in preventing corrupt practices and other types of misconduct. But definitely it makes sense to look at the positive experience and to assess if this experience can be relevant, can be useful for other sports, and implement the best practices. And also design and training programs as a part of compliance, especially for young athletes. We discussed already that it's crucial to start the promotion of fair play, rules, integrity, and compliance from sports schools, start with young athletes and their parents, and also sports organizations and professional anti-corruption organizations can develop such trainings and methodologies to support various countries, various organizations and clubs in promoting integrity and providing trainings for different categories of stakeholders, starting, as I said, from young athletes, parents, and sports schools.
Thank you so much. Okay, I don't think there are any question. I'm looking at the chat now. I think there are 2 questions were already answered. So is there any more questions? Anybody who's attending, if you want to raise any question? Okay, then if there's no questions, so I will just wrap it up and thank you, Mr. Garcia Silvero, Norbert Rubisek, and Edward Ivanov. It was wonderful discussion. Just to summarize what we talked, Mr. Norbert Rubisek very rightly pointed out about the proactive approach awareness program, the youth, catching the youth and training them. A very good example which he started with that. To ask a young athlete where did he come to know, and good to know that he was taught at a very young age. And of course, the fair play. Fair play is indeed in sports. We say sports person's spirit. Whenever even we have taken it from sports because that is the basis. And if the trust in fair play is lost, then the sports is lost. So we really need to protect that, and for that, I think we need to have a whole system in place. You also pointed out, the panelists pointed out about the code of ethics, which is very important. And I also said that we even in anti-corruption, we talk about the deterrence theory and principal agent framework, where we have people who are at the top who have to manage things to clean the system. But the top itself has to be clean. That's most important. And there comes the role of leadership, perhaps, which is again very important for sports federations and others who can really lead. It was actually heartening listening today to the CEO of SIGA today, that how passionate he is about it. And I think this will work. And indeed, the autonomy of the sports sector. At the same time, we have to look into the role of the governments. In 2021, we had 45 jurisdictions who have criminalized manipulation of a sports competition. Maybe this is Mr. Norbert, you mentioned about the high policy level things and then technical assistance. But of course, before high policy level at the federation on sports body level, but at the same time at I would say the national level, we need to have a criminalization. Maybe I would also look that whether our United Nations Convention Against Corruption needs to include some typologies of a sports corruption in its definitions. There's no definition, but it's description towards criminalization of certain activities. So thank you so much, and I hope all participants, you must have gained a lot during this session. And here I thank SIGA and of course all my colleagues, Lara, who has been handling this event, and James, thank you for introducing us and being the master of ceremony. So here I will close it and we will be in touch. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye and all the best to all participants. Thank you very much, dear colleagues.